They said she was untouchable, that no matter what came out about her, no matter how much heat she faced the machine around her would always protect her. But tonight that illusion is gone because Candace Owens has just made a move that has sent shockwaves through Hollywood legal circles, and it is not just a lawsuit, it is a declaration of war. And Blake Lively, the woman who has spent years controlling the narrative, is suddenly on the defensive because this time there is evidence, this time there are witnesses, and this time the legal gloves are off, and you are about to see exactly why this is so much bigger than anyone expected and why Blake's world might never look the same again. They say there is nothing more dangerous than a public figure who feels cornered, but what you are about to hear proves that when the perfect Hollywood image begins to crack, the chaos that spills out is nothing short of jaw-dropping, because this is not just a petty feud, this is not just another social media spat, this is a full-scale war spilling out of the shadows and into the courtroom, and the name at the center of it all is none other than Blake Lively, a name that has for years been synonymous with elegance, with grace, with that careful brand polish that made her untouchable. But what if I told you that behind that pastel perfection, behind those smiles that grace magazine covers, there has been a storm brewing, one that just reached its breaking point because Candace Owens has decided enough is enough, and she is not just firing back, she is doing it in a way that could change everything. Candace Owens, the conservative commentator known for her sharp tongue and relentless pursuit of the truth, is stepping into the ring, and she is not coming empty-handed. She's bringing legal action straight to Blake Lively's door, and the moment that news hit, insiders say Blake lost it completely. No carefully crafted PR statement, no calm deflection, just pure unfiltered panic that allegedly sent our team scrambling. Because here's the thing, when you operate in Hollywood, for as long as Blake has, you learn to control the narrative. You pay the right publicists, you plant the right stories, you play the game, but legal filings are not so easily spun. They are not shaped by lighting or filters. They are hard, cold records, and once they are in the system, they live forever, which is exactly why sources say Blake is in full meltdown mode, because according to court insiders, these filings from Candace's team are not vague. They are not just legal threats, they allegedly contain specific states, witness names, and even private communications that could pull back the curtain on some of Blake's most closely guarded secrets. Know before you think this is just another Hollywood lawsuit. Let me make one thing crystal clear. Candace Owens has built her career on dismantling narratives she sees as dishonest, and in this case she claims the dishonesty is not just casual, it is targeted, deliberate, and designed to ruin reputations, including her own. And the story of how these two women even ended up on a collision course is almost cinematic. It starts quietly with whispers in certain online communities about a smear campaign, about coordinated leaks, about influencers suddenly posting suspiciously similar anti-Candace talking points, and at first it was all speculation until a few brave voices started to piece together the breadcrumbs, and the name Blake Lively kept appearing, not as a direct poster, not as someone typing the words herself, but allegedly as they one funding and fueling the fire. And when Candace's team began digging deeper, they claim what they found was damning enough to not only go public but to take legal action. And that is when this war truly began, because Candace Owens is not the type to back down once she smells blood in the water, and this time the scent was all over. Hollywood filings, which we are told run hundreds of pages long, allegedly detail a web of communications between high-profile individuals and lesser-known online operatives. The goal, according to Candace's side, was simple: destroy her credibility, make her unhireable, brand her as toxic, and keep her off major platforms. And here's the kicker, the alleged coordination did not just stop at random trolls. The filings suggest certain mainstream outlets were tipped off, given slanted information, and encouraged to run with it without verifying the claims. And if that is true, if those connections are proven in court, the fallout will be catastrophic, because suddenly this is not just about Blake Lively, it is about an entire Hollywood machine willing to weaponize its influence against a single outspoken critic. And Candace Owens is betting everything that she can prove right, and let me tell you, the reaction behind closed doors when this filing landed was volcanic. According to one source close to the situation, Blake's team held what they called an emergency crisis meeting. Within hours, every lawyer, PR rep, and fixer in her orbit was pulled into a late-night strategy call, the kind where no one leaves until the damage is assessed. And the problem with assessing damage in a case like this is that you do not know how much the other side actually has until it is too late. So imagine sitting there hearing your legal counsel read out accusations about you orchestrating a smear campaign, hearing them Mention the possibility of subpoenas for your private messages, your internal emails, your bank transfers, and then realizing there is no way to stop it from being exposed once it is in motion. That is the nightmare Blake Lively is allegedly living through right now, and according to multiple whispers in the industry, it is showing in the way she's been acting in public. She's distracted, snapping at her usually loyal team, even canceling certain appearances that were planned months in advance. So what makes this even more dangerous for her is the way Candace is playing the long game. She is not just relying on legal action, she's using her platform, her massive audience, and her media connections to make sure this case is front and center in the public eye. Every development, every court date, every leaked detail is being dissected in real time, which means Blake cannot just wait this out in silence. The court of public opinion is already in session, and every time Candace speaks, she draws more eyes to the allegations and more pressure on Blake to respond. And here's the part that should really make Hollywood nervous. According to those close to Candace, she has only revealed a fraction of what she is holding on to. In other words, if Blake thinks this first wave of filings is bad, the second and third waves could be devastating. Candace's team is reportedly waiting to drop the most damaging evidence at the precise moment it will have maximum impact both legally and publicly. And that brings us to the most unsettling question of all for Blake Lively: can she actually win this fight? Because from a legal standpoint, it is not just about proving innocence, it is about surviving the discovery process without your entire private world becoming a matter of public record. And if the rumors about what Candace has are even partially true, survival in this case might not be possible without major reputational wounds, the kind that no amount of charity work or glamorous magazine covers can fully heal. And if you thought part 1 was intense, you haven't even begun to see the layers of chaos that are about to unfold, because as Candace Owens' legal team began filing motions and serving notices, it became clear that Blake Lively's carefully curated public image could not withstand the forensic precision of a courtroom battle. This was no longer about gossip columns or influencer tea. This was about sworn testimony, certified evidence, and an opponent who had no intention of backing down. And here's where it gets fascinating. Owens' camp didn't just come in swinging, they came in with a strategy designed to dismantle Blake's defense piece by piece. They subpoenaed communication logs, internal memos, PR strategy documents, and even behind-the-scenes texts from Blake's own production crew, the kind of materials that in Hollywood are considered more guarded than a blockbuster script. And when those first preliminary hearings began, the tone in the courtroom shifted. Instantly, the judge, who up until now had remained neutral, suddenly began asking pointed questions about Blake's prior statements and timelines, things that her own team had insisted were airtight. But under legal scrutiny, those statements started to fray, and the problem for Blake wasn't just the facts, it was that Owens' lawyers had mastered the art of the narrative. They weren't simply presenting exhibits, they were telling a story that painted Blake not as the misunderstood actress fighting for her truth, but as a calculated media operator who had been orchestrating smear campaigns from behind the scenes. And while Blake's attorneys tried to object or redirect the line of questioning, the damage was already being done, because the court of public opinion was listening to every legal filing was being dissected by commentary channels, journalists, and social media sleuths who were pulling receipts, connecting dots, and asking why Blake's version of events kept shifting every time new evidence was introduced. And what really set the internet ablaze was when one of Owens' exhibits included a previously unseen email chain between Blake and a known crisis PR consultant. The language in those emails wasn't casual, it wasn't the friendly venting her fans might imagine. It was strategic, direct, and in some parts coldly transactional, discussing how to control the narrative and neutralize opposition. Voice-to-voice phrases alone became viral hashtags, and as the screenshots spread across platforms, Blake's own fanbase began to fracture, with some defending her fiercely and others admitting they felt blindsided by the tone of those messages. And while this was happening, Owens herself was leaning into the moment. She took to her platform to say, "Truth doesn't need spin, it just needs daylight." A phrase that instantly became a rallying cry for her supporters, and the more she pushed back, the more Blake appeared reactive rather than proactive. At one point, a source close to the case claimed that Blake had been warned internally not to post on social media during the proceedings, but in a moment of visible frustration, she broke that protocol, responding to a vague post from Owens with a not-so-subtle clapback that only fueled speculation further. And that post would go on to be screen captured, dissected, and used as context in yet another filing by Owens' side, turning what might have been a fleeting Instagram story into a permanent part of the legal record. It was at this point that industry insiders started whispering about the long-term implications because, well, celebrity feuds often blow over. This one had the makings of a precedent-setting case, the kind that gets studied in law schools, the kind that publicists cite when warning clients about engaging with their critics, and the longer it dragged on, the more it seemed like Blake was losing control. Not just in the courtroom, but in the very arena where she had always thrived, the public eye. And here's the twist that almost no one saw coming. While Blake's lawyers were scrambling to contain the narrative, Owens' team was preparing to drop what they internally called the vault file, a collection of documents, videos, and corroborating witness statements that they claimed would directly contradict key parts of Blake's sworn testimony. And though the contents of that file were still sealed, the mere existence of it was enough to send ripples through Hollywood PR circles. Insiders began speculating that certain brand deals and endorsements linked to Blake were quietly being reviewed by corporate partners, not because of proven guilt, but because of the optics. And if there's one thing brands hate more than anything else, it's unpredictable optics. So now you had a situation where Blake wasn't just fighting a legal war, she was fighting an economic one too. The clock was ticking, the stakes were rising, and every move mattered, because one wrong step could trigger a cascade of losses. And the chilling part for Blake was that Owens didn't seem to be bluffing. Every leak, every filing, every calculated statement had been backed by evidence so far. So when Owens' lawyer hinted during a hearing that the most revealing information has yet to be seen, you could practically feel the collective gasp from everyone in that courtroom. And if Blake was rattled, she didn't show it outwardly, but those who had worked with her behind the scenes claimed attention was unmistakable. Meetings that used to be light and creative were now tight and urgent. Her inner circle was shrinking as the trust gap widened, and with trial dates looming, there was no sign that Owens was backing off. In fact, she appeared emboldened by the mounting public support, which only amplified the pressure on Blake's already overextended legal team. And as one legal analyst put it on a late-night news panel, this isn't just a fight for reputation anymore. This is a fight for survival in an industry that has no mercy for damaged brands. They say the more tightly you try to grip control, the faster it slips away. And tonight that truth was written all over Blake Lively's face, because while the cameras still caught her stepping out of black SUVs with that trademark smile, the stories behind those flashes told something far darker. And as Candace Owens' legal filings began to circulate, the narrative that Blake had so carefully curated for over a decade began to warp in ways she couldn't stop. The whispers in the corridors of Hollywood were now louder than the applause on the red carpet, and they weren't about her beauty, her style, or her acting. They were about power games gone wrong and a lawsuit that could unravel everything. What you need to understand is that Blake's empire wasn't just built on her career, it was built on relationships, favors, and the unspoken rule that she could make a phone call and doors would either open or slam shut depending on which side you stood on. But Candace Owens was not someone who played by Hollywood rules. She didn't fear the calls, she didn't fear the pressure, and she certainly didn't fear the reputational fallout that comes from going head-to-head with the beloved A-lister. In fact, that fearlessness became the exact weapon Blake wasn't ready to face, because for years her opponents either caved or were quietly erased from the conversation. Now, for the first time, someone was hitting back and doing it in a way that left a public paper trail inside Blake's camp. The panic wasn't just about the lawsuit, it was about discovery. Those dreaded two syllables that every PR-trained celebrity loathes, because discovery means emails, texts, private memos all being pulled into the light. And if even a fraction of what's rumored is true, Blake's team knew they couldn't risk that narrative bleeding into mainstream media. So in the days after Candace's announcement, calls went out not just to lawyers but to friendly outlets. The kind that owe you favors, the kind that can bury a story by replacing it with another scandal. But this time the shift didn't work, because Candace wasn't relying on tabloids to carry her message. She was using her own platform with millions of engaged followers who weren't about to let the issue die in a news cycle. It's here where the tone of the war changed, because suddenly it wasn't just about Blake versus Candace, it was about the idea of power in Hollywood and whether anyone, no matter how high they stood, should be allowed to operate without consequence. Candace's legal strategy was designed to be public. Every filing was framed with language that the press could run with. Every court date was hyped to her audience, and every reaction from Blake's camp was dissected for signs of weakness. And when the first preliminary hearing was scheduled, the internet lit up with speculation over whether Blake would even show or whether she'd send her lawyers as a shield. From the storm behind closed doors, there was talk of countermeasures, some even whispered about confidential settlements designed to silence the noise, but Candace's inner circle made it clear no private deal would be accepted because that wasn't. The point was to set a precedent, and Blake's camp knew that precedent could be deadly for anyone used to operating behind a veil of untouchability. Meanwhile, fans who had once defended Blake at every turn began asking uncomfortable questions on social media. Threads were popping up compiling screenshots, timelines, and alleged connections between Blake's inner circle and the incidents Candace had referenced in her complaint, and for the first time those threads weren't getting deleted or buried, they were going viral. This is where the real pressure started to mount, because Blake's image wasn't just a vanity asset, it was the foundation of every brand deal, every endorsement, every multi-million-dollar contract she had in place. If that perception shifted, the dollars would shift with it, and the fact that her name was now trending alongside words like retaliation, intimidation, and legal showdown was the kind of PR nightmare no crisis manager wants to see. The lawyers could fight in court, but they couldn't fight the slow erosion of trust that happens when your audience starts to suspect you're not who they thought you were. And in the middle of this chaos, Candace dropped another move, an unexpected interview where she doubled down on her claims, outlined new details, and hinted that there was even more damning evidence waiting in sealed court documents. It was a calculated strike designed to rattle Blake's team before the next court appearance. And it worked, because, according to insiders, Blake's lawyers immediately filed motions to limit what could be discussed publicly, a move that to outside observers only made her look more desperate to keep the truth hidden. By this point, the headlines had evolved from speculation to certainty. The phrasing shifted from alleged to accused, and each new article seemed to chip away at the carefully guarded fortress Blake had built over the years. Yet what made it worse was that this wasn't a story that could be forgotten in a week, because every time it started to fade, Candace would push another piece of the puzzle into the public arena, forcing Blake to react instead of control the tempo of the narrative. And in Hollywood, controls everything, lose that and you lose the game. But the game wasn't over, not by a long shot, because as one insider put it, Blake has two modes, charm and scorched earth, and while the charm had kept her on top for years, this fight was pushing her closer to the latter. Candace knew it and was prepared for it, but the question was whether the public was ready to see that side of Blake at full force, and if they were, would they ever be able to look at her the same way again? Because once you've seen the mask slip, you can't unsee it, and for Blake Lively, that mask was starting to crack in real time under the harsh glare of a legal battle she couldn't fully control. They say a cornered animal is the most dangerous, and after everything that has unraveled in this legal war, Blake Lively is no longer the perfectly poised Hollywood queen she once projected. She's a figure under siege, fighting fires on all sides, with the clock ticking louder by the second. The courtroom whispers, the leaked filings, the press conferences, they've all combined into this suffocating pressure chamber, where every move she makes is magnified, every misstep amplified, and this latest showdown with Candace Owens has stripped away whatever calm control she once had. Her legal team scrambling, her PR advisors pleading, but Blake's instinct isn't to retreat, it's to strike harder, and that's exactly what has everyone around her terrified, because they've seen the retaliation before. They've seen careers suddenly stall, brands quietly back away, insiders change their phone numbers overnight, and yet despite the fear, despite the power plays, Candace Owens has refused to blink. Instead, she's taken her fight directly to the legal front, refusing to be intimidated, and that in itself has changed the power dynamics in Hollywood forever. The judge's warnings, the mounting court orders, the growing pile of evidence. These are no longer abstract threats, these are tangible, irreversible realities closing in like walls, narrowing with every passing week. And the more Blake tries to wrestle back control, the more those walls seem to press in harder. And it's here where the real turning point lies, because even if she manages to push back in one case, the damage to her influence, to her public image, to the quiet leverage she once wielded has already been inflicted and cannot be undone. She is no longer the untouchable darling. She's the subject of open legal attacks and whispered industry bets on how long she can last. And in the middle of all this, the one figure refusing to back down, Candace Owens, has become not just a legal opponent, but a symbol, a warning to anyone else who has felt silenced by celebrity intimidation. And so the real question is not whether Blake can survive this particular battle, but whether she can survive the accumulation of all of them, because even the most carefully constructed empire eventually shows its cracks. And right now, those cracks aren't just visible, they're widening live in real time for the world to see. If history has taught us anything, it's that power lost in public rarely returns unscathed, and no matter how many statements her lawyers draft or how many red carpet smiles she forces for the cameras, the truth of this moment cannot be spun away. A fight is now underway that will define not only her legal fate, but her place in the very industry that once worshipped her, and the ending won't be written by her alone.